Hello, thank you for deciding to watch this video. My name is Rob Kerrigan, and I'm with my colleague Eric Shepard Martin. We're from Stenordje University, and today in this video, we're going to give a presentation on an evaluation of an extensive listening pilot program. So we initiated this program in the second semester of 2020 and the first semester of 2021. And so in the first half of this video, I'm going to give an overview of the program in my department. And then in the latter half of this video, Eric will give a description of his extensive listening program in his department. So let's begin. And the first thing I'd like to go over is the the principles of extensive listening. So what is extensive listening? Well, extensive listening is essentially the same idea as extensive reading, in that students should be listening to copious amounts of meaningful and comprehensible input. So there are a number of principles here that were based off of the principles of extensive reading from Day and Bamford. These were adapted by Gillibrand and van der Grift and Go. I'll just go over these just briefly. I won't spend too much time on them. But the first one is that learners need access to a wide variety of authentic listening texts. So the idea of authenticity is controversial in extensive reading and writing, but I'd like to focus more on the idea of wide variety. So this means a variety of genres. So for example, monologues, dialogues, narratives, lectures, and so on. Okay, so the next point is that the materials should be within the I-1 level for students. So essentially that means that there should be no unfamiliar language items. So vocabulary, grammar, and so on. So theoretically, the students should know most to all of the material in the text. The next point here is that students should be listening to the materials multiple times. So this can mean listening to the same text over and over. This can also refer to students listening to language items multiple times. So listening to vocabulary over and over again, the same vocabulary items. And it can also mean listening to the same type of genre. So for example, students listening to narratives multiple times. The next point here is that subtitles may help, but they may hurt. So this is still unclear, but the current extensive listening research by Chang and Millett have shown that reading while listening seems to be more beneficial for listening comprehension than listening only or reading only. Okay, the next point here is that learners should be choosing materials themselves. So choosing materials that are of interest to them. And the next point is that students should be listening on a regular basis. So for example, they should be listening for X amount of time per week. And finally, the students should be developing their metacognitive knowledge about their own listening processes. We'll see a small example of this in Eric's presentation later on. Okay, let's go on to the next part of the presentation. And so in this part of the presentation, I'd like to introduce the extensive listening program. So we introduced this program into the Global Studies Department in the second semester of 2020. And so this department is essentially the English department. So students in first year must take 4 classes of English per semester, and second year students take 3 classes per semester. Student proficiency levels vary considerably. So the group who participated in this program, their average CASEC score was 400, about 400, and the lowest score was about 140, and the highest score was about 700. And so one of the courses that students take is called Basic Communication. So it's their speaking and listening course. And so we thought that this was the most ideal course to introduce extensive listening. And so these courses are divided into 4. So there are 4 classes per year level. So totally 8 classes. And so 221 students participated in the program. And so in 2020, with the pandemic, everything went online. So we introduced this program basically completely online. And so that made things a little bit difficult. So we couldn't help students in person. And we also weren't doing real-time lessons at that time. So we had to provide on-demand videos to show students how to do extensive listening, how to use X reading, and so on. And so what we decided to do was to give students weekly listening assignments. So the listening assignments were they started from 1,000 words to 5,000 words per week. So the first tasks were 1,000 words, and then they gradually built up to 5,000 words. So totally, they were supposed to listen to 48,000 words by the end of the semester. We decided on 5,000 words because we calculated that if they listen to 1 hour per week, so say 1 word per second equates to about 5,000 words per hour. So we thought that was enough for a semester, for a week. And so for this program, they only had access to the audio. So there was no textual support. And the reason for that was because these students also take an extensive reading course separately. So some classes were using X reading for extensive reading. So we need to be careful there. Now, participation in the program, unfortunately, did vary. It depended on the class, and it also depended on the teacher. So some teachers actively engaged in the program and encouraged students to do extensive listening, whereas other teachers didn't really focus much on it. So that's the program there. So for the final portion of my presentation, I'd like to go over the evaluation of the program. So specifically, we wanted to see to what extent extensive listening contributed to students' gains in listening proficiency. So first, we conducted a t-test to see if students improved in their CASEC scores. And so in order to do that, we had to eliminate students who either didn't do the pre-test or post-test, or didn't engage in extensive listening at all. And doing so, we met the assumptions of normality. So we had a significant result. So there was a significant increase from pre-test to post-test by about 60 points. And we have to be careful here because this is the aggregate score of CASEC, so the whole score, including reading. And also, we cannot attribute extensive listening as a factor in this. So we decided to do a number of exploratory hierarchical linear regression models. And so the first model included the post-test CASEC score as the dependent variable. We entered the pre-test as a covariate, and then we entered listening time in seconds and the amount of words read as explanatory variables. Words read was not significant, so that was removed. However, listening time was significant. And so this model accounted for about 49% of the variance, and listening time accounted for 6% of that variance. So not much, but it was significant. So we then conducted another analysis using the listening scores only as the dependent variable. And again, listening was a significant predictor. The total model accounted for 40% of the variance. And again, listening time was 6%. We have to be careful interpreting these results, however, as the listening time and the listening scores total were negatively skewed. So the higher level students scored a much higher than the lower level students. And so there is an explanation for this. So one is the fact that the higher level students were engaging more in extensive listening. So they had higher scores to begin with, and they were doing more with extensive listening. So this could be a Matthew effect where the rich get richer. So these students already have passed a linguistic threshold, so they are able to engage in extensive listening. Whereas the lower level students, maybe they're not quite ready yet to engage in extensive listening. So we need to explore this further. Another possible reason is the teacher's encouragement to engage in extensive listening. So some teachers were very proactive, getting students to do extensive listening, whereas other teachers basically ignored it. I, for one, was in charge of the higher level classes, and I was really pushing the students to engage in the program. So I think that's a factor there as well. And so also at the end of the semester, we wanted to get the students' point of view on the program. So we gave them a questionnaire through Google Forms, asking for their impressions on the program, their reasons for not engaging in extensive listening if they didn't do so, and suggestions for improvement for future iterations of this project. Some were positive. There were some positive responses. So some students did say that it has merit. And yeah, that's worthwhile to improve your listening skills. Some noted that they think extensive listening was a main factor in their getting higher CASEC listening scores. So we see signs of maybe self-efficacy there. But majority of the responses were negative. So they ranged from, say, it was difficult to use, so they gave up. A lot of this is attributed to the fact that they were doing this during remote learning. So they were doing it on their own and didn't have much support from the teacher. Also, some students complained that it was only listening. They wanted textual support. Others complained that the task goal, the weekly 5,000 word goal, was too much. And it was also troublesome. And finally, that some people lost motivation. So they started doing it at the beginning, but they weren't succeeding in the quizzes. So they lost sort of confidence or self-efficacy, and they stopped engaging in the program. So we've taken these points of view into account, and we have adapted the program to suit the needs of the students much better, we hope. I'd like to go into it in more detail, but I'm afraid I'm out of time. So if you have any questions about the program, please, don't hesitate to contact me through the email on the poster here. So that's all from me. So thank you very much. And now I'll pass it on to my colleague, Eric. Okay, Eric, on to you.
Well, Rob, thank you very much for that. My name is Eric Martin, and at this point, I'd like to introduce the extensive listening program that was used with the education department students. So the goal of this program was to give students access to comprehensible English listening material. It was our opinion, after speaking with students, that they had not had much comprehensible English listening exposure, and that any opportunity to give them more of that would be useful for them. So first, I'd like to start with a disclaimer. This should be considered as action research. This is very preliminary. And unlike in Rob's department, in my department, the weekly listening assignments were given with textual support. So although I'm classifying this as extensive listening, this can also be called a listening while reading or reading while listening. And third, this was conducted during the COVID period. So although the first week of lessons were conducted in person, all the remaining weeks were conducted remotely. So therefore, all of these assignments were completed by the students independently, with a bit of encouragement from me each week during class. So as for the teaching context, all of these students were first and second year students in the education department with an in size of 119. They came from 4 classes. 3 of them were basic communication 1 classes, and 1 of them was a basic communication 3 class. The first year students had about an average CASEC score of 450, which is equivalent to about a TOEIC 350. And in the basic communication courses, they focus on developing communicative fluency, vocabulary knowledge, and developing their English speaking and listening abilities. Data was collected during the spring of 2021 from April until July, and the course ran for 15 weeks. So during weeks 1 and 2, I gave a class orientation and an orientation to X reading. This was the first time that the students had used X reading, and we chose it because students had access to graded reading material that was also accompanied with audio recordings. In the PowerPoint, I framed this as an extensive listening exercise. So I told them that the purpose was to try to use this material for listening practice. I asked students to look at the text when necessary, but otherwise to the best of their abilities, look away from the text and to try to choose text that they could understand only through listening. The target I set was 1 hour of listening and 500 words of reading weekly. This was chosen because this would equal about a rate of 1 word per second or a bit less. And when I phrased it this way to the students, they seemed to think that this sounded reasonable. There were no objections in class. Furthermore, we used Google Classroom, and within it, they had a forum to send me private comments. I actually made it a requirement for the course that each week they send me 1 private comment, either about class or about extensive listening, and no students raised objections through that. From week 5 onward, I also gave a qualitative weekly questionnaire. This was done through Google Forms, and it included 5 questions. Number 1, how did you feel about extensive listening this week? From it was really not fun to it was really fun. 2, how fast was your listening pace? Whether they slowed down the recording or they sped it up. 3, what amount did you read and what amount did you listen? So it goes from 0% to listening, 100% reading, up to 100% listening, 0% reading. 4, I think that my English listening ability is improving, down from I really don't think so up to I really think so. And 5, I think this activity is worth doing, and down to I really don't think so and to I really think so. So the questionnaires were given from weeks 5 to 12. Weeks 2 to 5 were used as a warm-up. And then weeks 13 to 15 afterwards were used for final tests and for a class report. So from weeks 2 until 5, the students engaged in 1 hour and 5,000 words goals. And then from week 6, I informed them that we would try listening only, and I turned the text off, which is a feature of X reading. So they were not able to see the text, they could only listen. A week later, there were a range of opinions. Some students found it challenging but rewarding, but enough students found it difficult enough to where they asked for that to not be continued. And so since we were conducting classes remotely, I agreed to that, and we continued only listening with textual support. During a week 7 survey, I asked them if they thought the goal should be changed. 75% said that they wanted to try listening only for 30 minutes, but that they wanted to do that every 3rd week. So 2 weeks with text, 1 week without for 30 minutes. 65%, however, said that they wanted the word goal lowered, which in retrospect would make sense, as they might need more time to listen to fewer words. So from then on, the amount was reduced to 2,500 words a week and 30 minutes of listening. Okay, now a bit about the results, which are on the poster. So as for words read, the semester goal was 25,000 words. 50% of students made it, and an additional 25% either read or listened or both, to between 10,000 and 25,000 words. I would just keep in mind that this was the first time that these students had engaged in extensive reading or listening, so this was new to them. And as there's not much other extensive listening research, a strictly appropriate goal has not been settled on yet. So this is good to know, and I would hope that in the future, with more in-class support, they might be able to hit a higher word goal. As with listening time as well, the goal was 5 hours for the semester. 34% of students made that, but an additional 16% of students listened to at least 3 hours of material outside of class. And again, we might hope to increase this goal with scaffolding in class, but I think it's a relatively strong start. As for the questionnaires, one question, do you feel that your English listening ability has improved? Clearly, looking at the graph, more students did feel that their listening ability had improved. The answer, I really think so, rose from 3 students in week 5 into 18 students in week 12. And I don't think so dropped from 6 students in week 5 to 3 students in week 12. The other question, how much did you read or listen? Again, you can see that the percentage of listening to reading is rising. Namely, the answer to only listening was up from 0 to 8. And only reading was down from 13 to 7 students. 40% listening and 60% reading, that rose from 16 to 26. So clearly there's a trend of students, even though they're still relying on reading, they are doing more listening in comparison to it. As for the other 3 questions, there were no significant changes. So there was a change of 1 or 2 students to each number, but that was it. So I think the takeaways from this, as far as I can tell, is that students reported that they felt that their listening skills were improving. There was a clear trend away from relying on the text. Listening appeared to be challenging, but 75% of the students seemed to be willing to accept the challenge if they could just do it once every 3 weeks for the start. I would like to get more scaffolding in the future, and I think that would be possible with in-person classes in which some time could be allocated in class to listening and to helping students choose material. And the multiple choice testing format from X-Reading, or that's associated with graded readers, might be problematic as it assesses the entire text. The listening might need to be divided into smaller portions, like chapters. So for example, they might need to listen to 2 chapters, and then that might need to be assessed through summaries. So these would be things to think about in the future. So thank you very much for watching, and please feel free to contact us. Our email addresses are at the bottom of the poster, and thank you again for your time.